The most powerful individual on earth is the President of the United States. During President Nixon's final year in office, long-standing concerns about his mental balance became widespread in Washington.
They told me the president had been drunk and ordered a nuclear strike, and then I saw the chairman of the Joint Chiefs commenting the same.
And his hands were shaking, visibly. And he said, "I've just come from the office of the Secretary of Defense." He wanted an agreement from the Joint Chiefs that nobody would take any action on the use of nuclear weapons without all of them agreeing to it.
The message had to be gotten through that there were not to be any extraordinary military measures that would be taken at anyone's behest.
This sounds like a banana republic I'm talking about. I'm talking about the United States of America.
This two-part Reputation special contains new revelations about one of the 20th century's most controversial politicians. Richard Nixon, 37th President of the United States, was born in 1913 and raised in this small house in California. His parents could not have been more different.
It's been assumed that the difference between my mother and my father in their personalities was reflected in my brother's behavior and reaction to certain situations. And that's probably true. My father was vociferous and very opinionated. His mind was made up, don't confuse him with the facts. He was known to fly off the handle, and my mother was the one there to calm him down, and she was just always concerned about everybody's troubles, and great lady.
Nixon was utterly devoted to his mother, but he was shy with girls. When he was 16, he began to date Ola Florence Welch. When they quarreled, Nixon seemed unable to face her to make it up and would send letters.
Sometimes he would get upset over I wouldn't know what, and then he would write me a letter the next day saying he was sorry for the way he'd acted. So I don't know, I just wonder, I don't know all what went through his mind.
When they separated 6 years later, Nixon sent a final letter. In it, he called his mother a supreme ideal.
He just wrote to me and said that his mother was a woman that was a wonderful woman, and that, and in a way I was like her, and that he was forever grateful to his mother for how much she had done for him.
To his teammates on the Whittier College football squad, Nixon seemed like a loner.
He just drove constantly to be one of the guys, but he didn't want to spend any idle time just talking around like small groups would do sometimes. Just a little margin there someplace that he didn't quite fit.
Nixon was desperate to make the first team.
We weren't good enough or heavy enough to be the first team. That discouraged a lot of people, you know, if they didn't have the fire to keep going. I'll give him credit, he didn't give up.
That same drive swept Nixon into politics. After a hard-fought campaign, he entered Congress in 1947. But life in the public arena was not easy for him.
Nixon was not gregarious, and he did not like to meet people he didn't already know. So for a politician, that is an unusual trait, and he had to become a politician by enormous self-discipline, and by, in some respects, acting against his nature, which was reclusive and studious.
I think he had politics in his blood, but I also think that his personality was one of some insecurity. And I believe he developed his leadership qualities and his desire to be in politics and government as a way to overcome those insecurities.
In 1940, Nixon married Pat Ryan. It was clear from the beginning that married life would come second to his political career.
And if there was anything she would have rather had, it would have been a quiet family life with her 2 daughters and grandchildren. But she knew he had to do these things. It was in his destiny, and his sense of mission just carried him right into it.
And I think you'll find that she's one of the best campaigners on record.
Well, I certainly will do all I can.
Republican hopes soar with the nomination of their 2 new standard bearers.
In the early 1950s, Nixon became Dwight Eisenhower's vice president.
When you're in a large crowd, you don't have to establish a direct relation with any one person. He did not feel as shy in front of a large crowd.
Ambition and hard work had made Nixon one of America's most high-profile public figures.
He had phenomenal discipline. This is one thing you've got to understand about this man, is the discipline. His self-discipline was awesome. He would give total attention to this, then he would turn and give total attention to that.
He worked so hard that he could stand up and speak without notes on any subject for 45 minutes.
But even in the early 1950s, people close to Nixon were becoming concerned about his unrelenting work rate. He was suffering from insomnia and back pain. A friend lent him a best-selling book called The Will to Live. The author was Dr. Arnold Hutschnecker, an Austrian émigré whose patients included the actress Elizabeth Taylor. The doctor had long been interested in how emotional disturbances affect health. Nixon was impressed by the book and arranged an appointment with the doctor at his practice in New York City.
She said that lately he is becoming a little nervous and his sleep is not so good. So I gave him just a medical prescription. He said, come back in 2 weeks, so he did.
In conversations with journalist Robin Swan in the 1990s, Dr. Hutschnecker talked more openly than ever before about his relationship with Richard Nixon. The doctor, now 102, has difficulty speaking. But their conversations back then were all taped.
At that point, Doctor was 95 years old. He shared with me his manuscript, a book he had been writing about Mr. Nixon, and told me that he felt that at this point he would be able to be more frank and more candid than he had been either in previous conversations or interviews about Mr. Nixon, or even in his own book.
Nixon had 5 appointments in 1952. As they spent time together, Hutschnecker began to feel that the vice president was suffering from depression as well as insomnia.
He wasn't psychotic, so he had no pathology.
Right.
But he had a good portion of neurotic symptoms.
But Nixon stopped the open appointments in 1955 when the doctor became a full-time psychotherapist. Being seen with Hutschnecker was too much of a political risk.
He just started to build a relationship of trust. Now he said he could really tell me everything, and then I said, I'm doing this, and then people around him would just cry out, you cannot see him anymore. What's the shrink? My God, I think you're nuts.